Hey everybody, so let's talk about the Grandmaster's Gauntlet. This is the team I used, we'll go over that, the one change that I maybe would have made, but first and foremost, I just want to say, do not underestimate this thing. I mean, we all like to joke about how Kabam's like, oh, this is hard, and then a bunch of people, finish it the first day, so that means it's nothing. But the thing is that that's often true of things where there's like one hard fight where you can just unit man your way through and it's not that bad. There are a few big potential roadblocks in here, and you need to be aware of them before you start. I've seen people come at this who, they just have a single rank 3, but it's a rank 3 that won't help for this, so they're looking at doing it with a team entirely of 5 stars. And they're like, well, I've got 20 revives. Is that going to be enough? Probably not. Because even if you have the best counters to all of this, there's really only one instance in which you can do this whole thing with 5 stars really efficiently. And that is, you have Ghost, you have Quake, and you are very, very good with both of them. And I mean very good. Not like I can play it, I can do the no parry style when I need to with Quake. I mean like you use her fairly frequently. Because there are too many different fights in here that if you are using non-optimal counters, it is going to add up. I have seen some runs with Ghost and Quake that were incredibly efficient. I'm sure a lot of you have at least heard of Metal Sonic Dude's run by now, where he did it without any revives, using a bunch of incredible mutants. I know that I'm not as good as him, but I might have tried that team if I had it, just because it looked like it was a lot of fun, right? And I probably would have been willing to pay the difference in skill between us. I don't have those, however, and I do not trust my Quaking to the level where I wanted to rely on her everywhere. I also just figured that if I was going to do this content, I wanted to have at least some fun with it, and Quaking 15 out of 21 fights is not my idea of fun. So that's how we got here. But I will acknowledge pretty much everywhere you can use Quake, and I will also link in the description both Vega's video on this, where he talks about who he used, and the spreadsheet that he goes over in his video, which shows his team, my team, and the team of 3 other players who had really good runs, mostly leaning on Quake. If you are good with her, it will help you here. I do not use Quake normally. I fall into the category of I can play her without parrying when I need to. And so when I was looking over this map, I was trying to pick out, okay, do I need to bring Quake? And I decided I did for 2 reasons. One is this Terrax. Because powerful from afar and energize, and how defensive he is when his rock shield is down, rock field. I've heard a lot of people take in magic and struggle here just because the AI does not cooperate. I did not want to deal with that, especially because in this kind of content, magic is just on the squishier side. I thought about bringing her, but I ended up going against it. Claire potentially can theoretically do this in Plague mode. I haven't seen it done yet, I've only seen it theorized. The idea would basically be to use Energize to your advantage, because if he has more power, you will steal more power. Rely on triggering powerful from afar a bunch while he's far away, or while buff immunity is up, so that you gain charges, and basically just cycle special 2s. The problem is that you would probably have to reparry because you would want to be blocking as much as possible so that he never threw any specials. Because if he throws even one, you may end up having a problem. You may end up getting backed into the corner and just dying to the rock field, because the only way she gets through this is in plague mode, which means you're not healing. So just be aware of that. Namor is, I think, the single most elegant counter. If you have a max sig Namor, you could potentially do this with a 4-star, and I'm not kidding there. Just backdraft the whole way through. Even if he clips you, you can probably get it on the next one. Like, he's perfect for this. I have never regretted not investing every mutant Sigstone I have found since pulling my 5-star more than I did when this content dropped. Because if I had had a max sig, even 5-star Namor, let alone 6-star, I think I would have brought him for this fight, and I would have figured out the other fight that I used Quake for, which was this Korg. This is brutal. A lot of us have seen Mixmaster Korg before. It's kind of a staple of high-tier war. It's really not that bad anymore. Aggressive actually makes that almost easier in some cases. Flux Dispersal starts being a problem because you have to heavy him to do damage. You know, if you're relying on somebody who actually has to land hits, so whose name is not Quake, that's a problem. I believe I still haven't watched all of the Metal Sonic Dude video yet. I know he used Korg, or I know he used Professor X. I'm guessing he probably relied on what I theorized in our planning stream with me and Vega, which is that I know Claire gets past Flux Dispersal with the direct damage on her specials. I'm assuming that Professor X also does. So that can definitely work, but if you are using anyone whose name is not Quake for this fight, including Apocalypse, because, you know, by this point you can probably have him scaled up to be a complete and total evade counter, and he can easily heavy Korg because Korg can't shrug his parry stuns. But there's this business. Increasing block penetration by 5%, you are not going to get through this in fewer than 20 landed hits with anyone other than Quake, which means that that block penetration is going to be over 100%. He's shock immune, so you can't overcome it by inflicting a shock debuff, which means that when you go to parry to land a heavy to get rid of Flux Dispersal, you are going to be taking at minimum a full blocked hit from a defender with 20,000 attack. And it's going to go up from there, and block penetration can go over 100, and that can one-shot you. So just be really careful planning for this Korg. I've seen several people say that they're going to use Falcon. I haven't seen it done yet. And my worry with Falcon is that because he has that aggressive node, that while Falcon can technically turn all of this off, Gauss Warp, Flux Dispersal, and Mixmaster, the periods during which Locked On is recharging, you normally have to dance with Falcon and just stay out of the way and wait for them to, you know, not kill you. That's not going to work with Korg because he is just going to charge at you, and you're going to try and get out of his way, and he's going to go unstoppable and unblockable, and then you're going to be in the corner, and then you're going to die. Now, it is theoretically possible that you play around that. Maybe you just do a ton of parries, and eventually one of them sticks, and you use that sweet time that buys you to get back up to Locked On. Maybe you manage to, I don't know, I don't use Falcon enough. Maybe it's possible to drop the rock shield and perfectly time that so that you can just parry him and wait for Locked On to come back. But that's a difficult fight, even if you have his L1 evade down perfectly, and a lot of us do not. Like I said, this is the fight that made me bring Quake, because I'm not a veteran Quaker, but this was still soloable for me, and fairly easily. I did end up blowing one revive on this, but I'm actually convinced it was due to a bug, because I did not record any of this. We'll get to that in a second. But when I actually did get hit and lose her on this fight, the evade text popped up, like a new evade. There were two of them on the screen, and I got hit anyway. Whatever, right? Like, just, it happens. It was still only one revive. That's pretty efficient. So those were the two reasons that I brought Quake. As far as roadblocks, we need to talk about Mojo, because Mojo just gets ugly, right? Every time you die to him, he gets worse. And after you've died to him 4 times, he's really bad. As in, like, you can enter the fight, and after 20 seconds, when it auto-completes whatever his current prompt is, he will place a hater debuff on you. It will instantly expire, and you will lose, like, tens of thousands of life. Do not underestimate this Mojo. I know several very good players who spent more than they wanted to on the entire thing on this fight. It's possible to get through him with a number of options. Archangel is quite good. It is technically soloable with magic. Like I said, if you brought her for Terrax, you could get through this. It's just going to be difficult. Torch is probably the single most efficient play, especially if you bring him for somebody else. I used Apocalypse, which is not the most efficient play. My original plan was to Quake this as well, but I was talked out of that by a number of people who said that because of the way Concussion interacts with his prompts, and the sponsorship deal node, she can get out of control extremely quickly, and if you get bad RNG, he can actually shoot up to 5,000 followers within that first 20 seconds, even with Quake, even with Concussion up. So he can be quaked. If you look at Vega's spreadsheet, several people did quake him effectively. Just don't assume that you can do that if you have not quaked Mojo before. That's my advice there. So like I said, I used Apocalypse, and that ended up being 2 revives. It was fairly efficient. We'll come back to that, because I just want to cover the other big roadblock, which is this Sasquatch. Do not assume you can outdamage this. There are a few champions that can, but very, very few. His healing is no joke at all. As in, rank 3 Ghost with suicides, with power back, can still end up failing to get him down. So life cycle is one of the biggest issues, because it means that you need to knock him down and then take him down to 0, and that could potentially be while he's regenerating. And to knock him down, you may need to parry him, which brings Hard Knock Life into play. This doesn't prevent Ghost's phase, but it does mess with her block proficiency, and it can make her parries fail. Recovery means his healing is going to be that much better, and then Power Snack means that he can gain power, and you have to spend more time baiting him out. It can make him more dangerous in his Wrath of Tanarak Berserk phase. Again, just slowing down the fight, prolonging it, making it more dangerous, and giving him time to heal. If you brought Torch for Mojo, then you can use Torch's pre-fight here, because Life Cycle will make him immune to damage from debuffs, but it does not make him immune to damage from passives. And so Torch can do this pretty efficiently. Similarly, because Archangel's neurotoxins are passives, he can get this down, but Hard Knock Life means that you're going to be taking a ton of block damage as you are getting him down. Quake can also do this if you knock him down to increase the timer on Life Cycle a few times at the beginning, and then knock him down right before an Aftershock. Right before an Aftershock hits, right at the end. That can kill him. Again, if you look at Vega's spreadsheet, you'll see that several people did that effectively. I used Apocalypse, and I actually think it's a pretty reliable solo, but there are a bunch of caveats to that. And so again, we'll get back to that when I go through them in order. But just do not underestimate this Sasquatch. I know several very good players, like even in Masters Alliance, these people are considered ringers, who quit out because this fight frustrated them so much. Do not underestimate it. It can roadblock you. If you have an answer for everything else but this, seriously consider quitting out early right here. And that's another thing that I want to talk about, is that as amazing as these rewards are, they are absolutely better now than whenever this content comes back in the future. But if you're going to be spending like 6, 7, 10,000 units on this, because your account is not ready for it. When given 6 months, you might be able to do this in just a few hundred units. And you still have a ton of Act 6 and Act 7 to explore. You haven't even touched Abyss. Think very carefully before committing to a full run on this. You do have to fight at least 10 fights to actually get to Thanos with a chest, so you have to plan for those 10. But even if you just do those 10, you're going to get, a free rank 2 6-star. You're going to get 6-star shards. You're going to get tier 2 alpha. Like, the rewards are significant. And if you can plan a team around only those 10 fights, which is going to be a lot more flexible than planning for all 20, then it very well may be worth it to just go through those first 10 for a couple hundred units, claim your rewards, and keep building your account. Kabam was not kidding when they said that this content was aimed at endgame accounts. Please do not assume that you are there just because you are a good player and force your way through this. It can get ugly. And no amount of solos on YouTube is going to change that. So now that we've been depressing for a while, let's talk about who I actually used. So Doom, I used Apocalypse. This was a fairly easy solo, in my opinion, but he's also the first fight, and this costs no energy, so I practiced it a ton. Bubble Shield is the biggest issue here for Apocalypse, because that block damage can really add up. Doom already has native block penetration. You don't want to deal with that. So what I did was, because Apocalypse turns off these next 3 nodes by being an extra large champion, what I did was I just basically intercepted very carefully. Do not just immediately go for backdrafts. Doom will smack you. But if you are careful, you hit into his block, you make sure you don't get backed up, you wait for clean opportunities, maybe you wait for him to throw heavies, you can pretty safely get to your L2 before ever blocking a hit from Doom. You are going to want to throw your L2 with ending in a light attack so that you get the concussion up. My next piece of advice is then you want to go to your L1 and throw it, again ending in a light attack, to get the weakness up. Now you have a 40% chance to turn off Bubble Shield. You have a 40% chance to turn off Doom's aura when he throws his L1, and you have that weakness on him, making everything he does more punishing. Turning off the aura matters because that makes it a lot easier to land your heavies, which is going to be critical to refreshing both of these debuffs long enough to get to the special 3. Now you could try and throw another special 2 and special 1 to get the degen and the poison up. I personally don't recommend that, because only a 40% concussion, you are just rolling the dice. You want to get to the L3, lock it in, and double its potency, because then you have an 80% concussion. That is way more reliable, and that is going to allow you to pretty safely build back up to another special 2, another special 1, get the degen, get the poison, lock them in with heavies and another special 3, and now the fight is just golden. Hopefully, if you've played carefully, you still have like 80% health left or more on your Apocalypse. Even if you have a 5-star, you're probably doing okay. At this point, I would just spam special 1s, because that's the most hits per bar of power, and it's Doom, so you're not really going to crit, right? Don't worry about how much damage the actual hits from the special does. This is all about the red numbers, and that means you want the L1. Moving on to Terrax, like I said, I quaked this. I personally am not super comfortable with his animations. The axe just throws me because I can't actually see Quake for half of it. That's a personal weakness. I needed 3 revives to take this guy down. Plenty of other people on Vega's spreadsheet just soloed it. It's not that bad. If you're a good Quaker, don't worry about it. Otherwise, it was a problem. Like I said, Namor would have been nice. So Vision, I used Magneto. If you have a rank 3 Magneto, if you use Suicides, if you use Power Back Boosts, if you use Power Back Boosts and Suicides even on a rank 5, this can be done in one go. This can absolutely be soloed, because it's not that hard to get to one special 3, and then you just almost instantly have another special 3, because my rank 5 without power back, without suicides, that first special 3 did like, it was some ungodly amount of damage. I think I took him all the way down to 10%. But I was willing to trade 1 revive for not spending the extra boost resources or spending the units on changing my masteries. Up to you how you do this. Quake can also do this. Doom can do this. There are a number of ways. Again, check out Vega's spreadsheet. Come to the Discord if you don't have any of those and you want to talk about others. MODOK, I also used Red Magneto. Archangel can do this. Apocalypse can do this. You can build up that disorient immunity right away. Ghost can do this. You just won't be using specials unless you have Wasp. I personally, like I said, used Magneto. And what I did was I didn't even try to stun him at first, because even with a 70% ability accuracy reduction, Hard Knock Life is going to trigger eventually. So I ignored stun vulnerability at first, and I just played him as though he were stun immune, basically. I was baiting heavies, I was intercepting him, and I was just building power to my L3. Once I got there, that's when I started heavying. Now, you can heavy on your way to your L3 a few times, just don't bother charging it, get those indefinite prowesses, and then you have more to double when you do get your 3rd bar of power. So basically, as soon as you get close to your L3, start trying to double your prowess. What I did was basically I just tried to get a few in a row where I could double the prowess. And then that would get me to 15 maybe. And then I would just charge it without parrying, double them, and immediately throw it. And that would get me a bunch of bleeds. You could also go for 1 more parry to take advantage of the stun vulnerability. It's really up to you. It's a matter of, do you want to for sure solo this without taking much block damage? Because then you can do this in 4 or 5 L3s and not worry about stun vulnerability at all. Or do you want to try and get it down right away in a couple big L3s, then you can try and stun. It's really up to you. There are a number of different ways to do this. I should not have had to revive here. I accidentally pushed him to his special 2 while I had 2 disorients up. Was not expecting it, panicked a little bit on the L2 evade, and one of them into my block killed me. Just one of those buzzsaws even blocking. Though, don't underestimate the block proficiency reduction. That said, not that difficult with Magneto. I've seen Quake do this as well as the other ones that we talked about. Not that bad of a fight, but you do need to bring a counter. So, Spider-Ham, or Spam as a lot of people are talking about, can be quaked. I actually don't consider him that bad of a quake. His animations are a little weird, and so he throws off some people. All of my duels were going fine against him, but I still didn't mess with him here because I knew someone who had soloed him with Apocalypse, because you can use the taunt to heal up via willpower, and it's extremely easy to build up his evade counter because of how annoying this guy is. Now, I've talked to a bunch of people who basically say, well, then you must have had the greatest luck in the world on his AI, because that energize means that he's just going to constantly have power, you're going to constantly be blocking L2s, how do you survive that? And the answer is you take advantage of the defensive node. That defensive node makes him really annoying for somebody like Ghost, who can also solo this. But if you're using someone like Killmonger, or maybe Falcon, or Apocalypse like I was, then defensive is actually a good thing, because it means when he backs up and blocks, he's probably going to stay there. And that means that you can go in and hit his block and back him up. And it means that Spider-Ham is not going to do as much the thing that he loves to do on power gain nodes, which is just back you up in 2 combos and then you're in the corner dodging his heavies. That still can happen, but this fight is very doable if you just take it slow. I did have to revive once here because, and this is just a lack of planning on my part, I did not fully understand his kit, and I accidentally pushed him to his special 2 while it was unblockable. I did not nail the evade, and I got crit twice for 18,600 damage on each crit. That's enough to kill Apocalypse. Second one, though, I took him from like 95% to nothing. It was, yeah, Apocalypse is very efficient, but it was over 400 hits. So whatever you're going to do on this one, just remember to hit his block and play it slow, play it safe. So moving on to the second path, we have Weapon X Wolverine. Quake can do this. This is an excellent place to ramp up Aegon if you're bringing him for fights later on, like Void. Archangel can do this. I believe that's who Vega used. Again, check out his spreadsheet. I used Warlock, and I thought it was pretty easy. I even actually got caught on a dashback once and ate a combo, including some crits. I think that was when he had like 80% health left, so I was a little bit worried, but I still pulled off the solo, just being safe, right? You just do your backdrafts while he's berserk because he's so aggressive, but you don't even need to do that. Just play it safe. You can wait out the berserk phase if you need to. Keep hitting into his block, if nothing else, to keep your infection up. Eventually he will come down. He really does not have that much health. The Wolverines actually have lower than average health pools because they were balanced around what was the best regen in the game when they came out. You will get through him, just have a counter for it, whether it's Archangel, whether it's Warlock. I think I might have brought Mysterio my second time through. We'll talk about that in a minute, but he's not that bad. So then we have Thing. I used Tigra for this. This is another place if you brought Aegon. He's fantastic. You can do this with Cable if you're using the mutant team. You can probably do this with Professor X or even Apocalypse. There's not a whole lot to this thing, honestly. It's just that he's going to do a ton of block damage and you need to have his evades down, which you should if you're fighting a thing anyway, honestly. The block damage is why I ended up reviving here once with Tigra. I just did not manage it well in my first fight. That's completely on me. This is very soloable because because of Oscillate, you are probably going to lose your senses if you lose Tigra, but you just accept that, right? Most of the fights in here that Tigra can take have some factor in them that makes it hard to play Tigra the way you want to play her, where you have both senses up, you're rushing through up to that L2 with a bunch of heavies, you throw that L2 with like 12 or 15 ruptures on them, and it just does a ton of damage. That's difficult to do here. Play it slow, land your heavies when you can, use your L1s to keep your senses up, because having the orange hunter sense active when you throw your heavies and your L1s is actually more important to your damage over the long term than getting off big L2s. Now, if you get an L2, go for it. I had several and they were beautiful. It's just not going to be the main thing you do against this guy. The other thing to keep in mind when fighting Thing with Tigra, as you know if you've watched any of my war videos, is while her neutralize does stop his unstoppable buff, it only stops it for the next hit. So if he is at 15 and you attack him and actually land the hit, he will go unstoppable and you will probably lose that fight right there. But if you are careful with your heavies, your L1s, and your combos, and you keep him always at like 12, I like to put him at 13 or 14. Then it's pretty manageable. The reason I like 13 or 14 is because if he's at 12, then one heavy puts him at 15. And so you have to be really careful about that. If he has 12 rock charges, or whatever they're called, and he's well below a bar of power, and then he goes to heavy, do not heavy him in return, because now he will be at 15 and below a bar of power. It is, of course, possible to wake up intercept him after you throw that heavy, and you can catch him before the neutralize wears off and reset it, but that's taking a risk you don't have to. If he heavies in that situation where you have 12 and he's well below a bar of power, I would just combo, because a 7-hit combo is going to put him at 13 or 14, and then that's just that much safer. Then you can land a heavy and get your ruptures up on the next one. Korg, like I said earlier, if you can, just quake it. There are other ways through, but that the combination of Flux Dispersal and Gauss Warp just makes this ugly for anyone else. If you're using anyone else, especially if you're trying to emulate MSD, then there are relatively efficient ways through this, and I wish you luck. But if you're bringing Quake for anything in here, use her here. Dragon Man, it is possible to Quake. The idea is that you block an L1 to remove his power charge, and then you want to have a concussion up when the timer comes back around, and he would gain it. Because once it's gone once, it's gone forever. The problem is that this one is stun immune, and so I tried twice with Quake, and I just could not get it to line up. He was always actively attacking into me when the power gain came back, and so the concussion just would not stay up. If you can get the long concussion from the actual aftershock detonation on when that happens, that'd be great. Again, it just was not working out for me, and so I gave up on Quake after those 2 tries and used Tigra and soloed him from 97% to 0. Because she has the same advantage. If you block that power charge once to get rid of it, if you block the L1 to get rid of the power charge once, and then you have Neutralize up when it comes back around, he will never gain it again. And now it's just an aspect of evolution tanky boy. I almost lost the solo from underestimating aspect of evolution and blocking a few hits late in the fight to try and bait heavies. If you do use Tigra, don't do that. Just intercept him if you can, otherwise hit his block, push him to his special one, which aspect of evolution will make easy, and just use your heavies after his special one. There are going to be enough of them, you're going to have enough ruptures up, it's not that hard to keep your senses up on this fight. You're not going to have as many big L2s as you would like, but I had quite a few of them here. This is an excellent Tigra fight if you know how to use her. On that subject, just to discuss other options, Dragon Man does also work with Doom. Torch can take this down. There are a few ways around this. Just make sure that you plan something for it, and don't just go, oh, well, I'll just bait him out, because aspect of evolution plus his power gain means that eventually you will have a problem. And remember, Power Bond stops power drain. Power Steal will still work, apparently, which is why Doom works so great here. But just be ready for that fight. But this Black Panther Civil Warrior was like a chef's kiss Tigra fight buried in the middle of this. This was the most fun I had in the entire thing. Because, yeah, he starts with Arc Overload, which means he starts unblockable. And I'm pretty sure that means that I just waited out my first set of senses. I might have intercepted him and kept them up. I don't remember, but it doesn't really matter. Because once that first Arc Overload goes down, you can parry him because he won't have any armor ups, and then you can attack into him, and Neutralize will prevent him from proccing new armor ups. And Neutralize also prevents Footloose, it prevents Arc Overload, and once it prevents Arc Overload Arc Overload will never come back. Which just means that you're dealing with a Black Panther Civil Warrior without any armor ups. Now, the one thing I want to you need to keep in mind if you use Tigra for this fight is that if you hit into his block while Neutralize is not up, he has a high chance of proccing an armor up, and now it is suddenly dangerous to heavy him because of his SIG where he goes unstoppable by consuming an armor up, and he's unblockable. So I did my best to not hit into his block unless I had Neutralize up, but as long as you do that, then you can safely parry him. Tigra can heavy after his heavy attack, his L1, his L2. This was honestly so easy. This was a dream Tigra fight. If you have her, you're going to really enjoy it. But that said, if you don't, you can do this with Apocalypse. Just watch for that unstoppable on heavy thing if you're trying to refresh your buffs. Same issue with Doom. If you have a shock and you go to heavy and you apply that passive stun, if he has an armor up, he can go unstoppable and wreck you. Just watch for that stuff in general. But Doom, Apocalypse, even Archangel can all work for this guy. If you're doing the Quake and Ghost team, this is an excellent place to use Ghost. You could use Quake for this. Basically, the theory would be that as long as Concussion stops Arc Overload once, then he will never have another armor up. And then, yeah. I think Concussion probably even stops his Stun Reflect the first time. So it's really just a matter of who you want to use there. I didn't even try because I had Tigra, and I know how fun that one is. Nightcrawler. So I said I used Spider-Ham to charge up the evade counter on my Apocalypse. I actually had him at 100% chance to bypass evade before spam was halfway down. So this Nightcrawler was a complete joke. He had no ability to evade at all, because Apocalypse's evade counter is not actually an ability accuracy reduction. It is just a chance for Apocalypse to bypass it. It's kind of like True Strike in that way. So there was nothing he could do. And yeah, I didn't even bother switching him out of the Neaphim mode. I think I actually intentionally left him there because on the off chance I got hit, I didn't want the extra crit damage from him in Swashbuckler mode. I didn't, but yeah, that was an incredibly easy Apocalypse fight. There's nothing involved there at all. And entering it, my Apocalypse was at 4 charges because he's a mutant. You can also, of course, Quake Nightcrawler. You can use Ghost for Nightcrawler. You cannot use Falcon. Whoops, sorry, clicked on the wrong thing. You cannot use Falcon because of Force of Will, which is one of the biggest reasons that I don't think Falcon is great in here, because you're basically just using him for Korg and, there's one other, maybe MODOK? No, actually, he's not reliable for MODOK. I forget who the other Falcon fight in here is. But I don't think that it's a great call. But you can use Ghost. You could even use Killmonger here. I know a few people who brought Killmonger as their primary evade counter. He doesn't stop True Strike. Similar issue with Apocalypse. You can also use Professor X, because the way he turns off evades also bypasses Force of Will. Similar issue with Spider-Gwen. On all of those counts, Killmonger will work. Apocalypse will work, Ghost will work, Professor X will work, Falcon will not work, and you don't want to use Quake because of Window of Opportunity. Or at least I think so. I'm pretty sure that works against her. Yeah, because even if you stunned her effectively with Window of Opportunity, you would then take all of your own Aftershock damage because of One Eye Open. So even if you're using someone who can stun her, don't. This is the one issue with using Apocalypse, is that you don't want to double hit into her block, because that will try and stun her. Now the thing is that because Apocalypse at 4 charges is stun immune while attacking, you won't get stunned, but as you complete that combo with her stunned, you will be hurting yourself because of One Eye Open. So just be careful with this one. It's basically the same as the Nightcrawler fight, just slightly more complicated. Another anti-Falcon node, not that you should almost ever use a skill against Domino, but she also has Limber, so you're going to want to watch out for that, Debilitate, Matador, and Power Shield. So the issue here is that because of Matador, you need her to throw her specials, but she will often throw her specials soon after she gets them, which means that you very well may be unlucky, and so you're probably going to try and parry her L1, and you do not want to get stuck in the corner when she has 2 bars of power, because of how difficult it is to properly mitigate the block damage there if you can't evade. And of course she has 20,000 attack value. So I soloed this with Apocalypse because he turned off all of her lucky evades by this point, same as the previous 2 nodes, and his specials do a crud ton of damage, so he was great for Power Shield, but it did take me from 90% health on him down to 15, and that was just the crit fails, because every time it procs you lose, it's 2,000 life or something. I hate fighting Domino. But Apocalypse works great. Ghost will work if you're careful. I don't think Quake does there. Warlock was also an option for her. There are a number of ways through. If I had brought Mysterio instead of Warlock, I definitely would have used him there, because then you're not looking at any crit fails. and I probably just would have built to a special 3 and laughed at how much damage it did. We already talked about how Mojo is a potential problem point. We've talked about a lot of the counters to him. I personally used Apocalypse, and I think this was the heaviest I boosted out of the entire Gauntlet, because I knew that every time I died to him, my day would get worse. I got a little bit lucky my first run, and I took him down 67% in my first run with Apocalypse. I then got comically unlucky in my second fight, and every single time we were far enough away from sponsorship deal for me to actually wait out his prompt and drop him back down to his new floor of 2,000 followers, he got something stupid like dash back or block a hit where there was almost no way around it. That happens. And then every time he got a difficult prompt, like idle or whatever, then it was close enough to sponsorship deal that just auto-completed it. So my second attempt, I only took off 10%. Not great. But I was able to drop the last bit with my third attempt, and then that was pretty efficient. 2 revives for Mojo is quite good. I know a number of people who used Apocalypse and had much worse days. So, like I said, prepare for this one, but there are ways through it. I-Bomb was the single worst node in this entire thing for me. If you came here from Vega's video, you already know that. There was really no good reason. The problem is just, this is the fight that makes me wish that I had brought Mysterio. Now, I've rethought that a couple times since saying it, because Warlock, via his synergy with Magneto, was giving me both 12% extra attack rating on every special I threw with Apocalypse, which is awesome, and 12 extra crit damage rating from Magneto's side of it, both of which were hugely helpful to everyone else. So maybe this was just the price that I paid, but I used 5 revives here, which was a quarter of my entire total, because Warlock's dashback is just not good. It is shorter than normal, and I kept getting caught by the Pillbug of Death, and because of Sadist and how he applies his own debuffs, he was hitting so hard. If you get caught by his L1, you will probably die. It was really unfortunate. I did kind of learn to manage the spacing properly. After that, maybe I should have done a couple duels. I'm at peace with it. It was just unpleasant. This Return to Sender node is why you don't want to use heavies with Warlock. It's what makes Archangel difficult, but he can be done with Archangel. He can be quaked. He just has native physical resistance, and it's going to be a long one. And if you parry, you'll probably die. I believe MSD did it with Professor X and Max Pacify, just being very careful. Go check out his video if you want tips on that. These last 2 just make other things more difficult. My strategy with Warlock, which was okay it was actually pretty solid when it was going well, was that I parried him a lot, and I was trying to limit my combos because I run maxed Petrify, so if I was only hitting him while stunned, I could kind of manage his power gain. And then the idea was for me to throw my L1 while he was infected and get that power drain. And the way it was working out was that when that was going well, I could get off 4 or 5 of those L1s before he finally threw one of his. And so while I used 5 revives, 2 of those attempts were worth almost 40% each. So even with Warlock, if I had just arrived at that strategy faster and had a little more respect for how dangerous that L1 is for somebody with a shortened dashback, I probably could have done this in 2 revives. Mysterio, I think I could have soloed. Whatever works for you here. I see a number of people bringing Aegon on the theory that he'll purify the poisons. That should work. If you have another poison immune you're bringing for some reason, awesome. But just as long as you have a counter, that one's honestly not too bad even though it was so painful for me. Next, we have this Apocalypse. The most efficient way through him is using a villain because of this node right here, where if you use a hero, he will start with 4 charges and be able to stun you through block. So I've seen Doom solo him. I believe Brian Grant did that. A few other people have done that. Ghost is a villain, so if you're good with her, that's pretty solid, especially if you're good against his evading his specials. His usual counters of robots I would not recommend, because 70% reduced ability accuracy is just too much. Like, most of your things not working is difficult. It's like fighting Magneto with Warlock. Yeah, you might win the fight, but, don't. This last one doesn't really matter. That's just basically, if you brought in a robot despite this node before it, this only comes into play if you eat a heavy from him, which you shouldn't be doing anyway. The genetic refinement part. So if you bring a hero, technically Apocalypse can only stun you through your block if it's not a well-timed block, which means that if you have more confidence than I do, you can just, re-parry ad infinitum with somebody like Tigra or Aegon and crush this fight. I know one guy who did do that with Aegon. And if I were braver and I felt like I had more time and ability to practice it, I probably could have done that with Tigra, and it would have made things easier. Because while Tigra can solo this, if you don't do what I just said, which is how you would bait out heavy attacks and then easily counter them, which is the normal way you fight Apocalypse, if you don't do that, then you are probably going to lose your senses a lot, kind of like against the Thing because of Oscillate. And you're just going to have to deal with your lower damage output because of that. She's still a decent option because, she basically doesn't take block damage. You just have all of the special ones miss, and she will eventually get him down. But because it is a slow fight, I did eventually get caught on a dashback, and I did need to revive there. Sasquatch, like I said, probably the single scariest potential roadblock in this entire thing. Do not underestimate him, and do not assume without testing it or practicing that you can get him down even with some of the counters that people mentioned. Like I said, I soloed with Apocalypse, but I know other people who quit out using Apocalypse. So to go over my strategy with Sasquatch, I am extremely comfortable fighting him because I take him like 80% of wars on encroaching stun with Torch and on that mini-boss, which means that I am very comfortable dealing with Wrath of Tanarak. I know my timing for it, and I know that even when he's unstoppable on his heavy, I know the window for where you can safely retaliate against that, and that is huge for this, because it allows you to heavy counter with Apocalypse if you need to. But the strategy here is that you need max Despair, and you need, in my opinion, max Petrify. You can do it just with max Despair, but it's harder. What you're going to want to do if you're using Apocalypse is that you are going to want to build first to your L2 and throw that. That's going to get the concussion and the degen up. The degen isn't going to do anything, but it's one more debuff. The concussion is going to make him sometimes not unstoppable when he's in Wrath of Tanarak. And what you want to do there, once you throw the L2, I recommend going straight to the L3. You can also throw the L1, and I believe I actually did because I felt pretty comfortable with him. But you want to lock in those debuffs. Wrath of Tanarak makes it harder to refresh them with the heavy, and so the single most important thing is just locking in those debuffs and making them permanent. Because even though they don't do a whole lot to him other than the concussion, the key is that you want 4 of them. I will mention Hard Knock Life is difficult for some people. Apocalypse becomes immune to it after a single parry and 8 seconds passed, so I kind of ignored it. If you're using Archangel, then things get a little dicier, but I'm going to ignore it for the rest of this. You want to lock in those 4 debuffs because with Max Despair, that's a 60% reduction in healing. Now, that's not enough, especially because he has this 50%, but your poison is reducing at another 33%, and you're up to 93% now. When you stun him with Petrify maxed, that stun debuff is doing another 45, because I believe it's 30 from the Mastery and another 15 from Max Despair. And now you are up to, what is that, 93, so that would be 138% reduction. And so that means if you get even one more debuff up, and I think I was heavying fairly liberally throughout this, then you have now reversed his healing, and Sasquatch has that ability where if you reverse his healing for even a split second, all stacks of his healing are removed. And that means that once you have that 80% concussion up, and he's only proccing those healing stacks occasionally, that as long as you're out of Wrath of Tanarak, you can remove them just by parrying. Or, because it's Apocalypse, by hitting into his block and stunning him. And that made this pretty efficient to me. He would occasionally heal during Wrath of Tanarak, but it wasn't enough to outweigh the damage I was doing to him with my L1s, and then I would turn it off every chance I got outside of Wrath of Tanarak. You do need to heavy enough to deal with Life Cycle, but with Apocalypse that's not really an issue. Power Snack can be annoying, especially if you're not used to dealing with it, but that's also affected by Apocalypse's concussion, and so I didn't see that many triggers of it. 80% is phenomenal. Apocalypse, once he's made that concussion permanent, has better global ability accuracy reduction than Magneto. If you hadn't thought about that, take a minute to appreciate it, because it was so helpful throughout all of this. But yeah, that's how you do this with Apocalypse. Get your 4 debuffs up, rely on your stuns, have those 2 masteries, Despair and Petrify, maxed out. And I won't say this was an easy solo because I've seen it escape other people, but it felt safe to me. Like we've talked about, there are other options. Archangel can do this, he'll just take a ton of block damage. Quake can do this. Torch is the easiest for this, I just didn't feel like he fit in my team otherwise. You could probably, you know what? You could do this with Mysterio. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but you could. Maybe I would have tried that if I had ended up bringing him. So this Killmonger was another Apocalypse solo. There are a lot of ways to do this. Polka Dot Power makes Cable good. You can Quake Killmonger. I am nowhere near that confident with her, but other people did. If you are very confident in your timing, you can Ghost this node. I do not consider that worth it personally. So like I said, I used Apocalypse. The strategy here is kind of similar to everything else with Apocalypse, which is get the debuffs up and make them permanent. But the way you do that is that right out of the gate, you're going to block his attack and then back off. And then this Sharpened Claws node is going to inflict those bleeds over 3 seconds. You're going to wait for them to expire. You're going to block 1 more attack. You're going to bleed for 3 more seconds. You're going to block 1 more attack. Now you're bleed immune. Somewhere in there, he probably threw a heavy. When he does, you counter with a heavy. Because up till this point, he will have no power, you will trigger reverb at no power, and therefore it will do no damage to you. Once you've triggered it, you can fairly freely parry heavy. It will grant him power, but you don't really need to worry about it. You just want to either wait out reverb or bait his specials when he's exactly at a bar of power, so he has almost no power afterwards, then trigger reverb, and then again it will do almost no damage. That's the way to mitigate Killmonger in general. And it worked very well for me here. Again, just throwing a ton of heavies to get Polka Dot Power. And then obviously with Apocalypse, once you get to his L2, which I started with again for that concussion, you also have the degen up, also feeding Polka Dot Power. and then I used the L1, then you have the poison, also feeding Polka Dot power. Then I went straight to the L3, locked them in, and now I had 2 permanent damage over times. I had an 80% concussion, which was mostly turning off reverb for me, but I was still trying to activate it when he was at low power. Yeah, this was not a hard fight. I took the vast majority of the damage I took here was from that bleed at the very beginning. If you don't want to do that, if you could have used Suicides on Apocalypse in an earlier fight and built up the immunity that way, but I figured that even if I died once with Apocalypse from building it here, then that would be 1 revive, which was 40 units, which is less than the cost to switch into and out of Suicides. So I accepted that for me. And you would have had to switch out of Suicides or Void would have eaten your lunch. This is a difficult node. I was thinking about bringing Aegon for it. That's why a lot of people are bothering to bring him and ramp him up on Weapon X. Because those weaknesses really, really hurt. But Power Shield means that you can use almost anyone to cut through him. Professor X is great. I soloed him with Apocalypse. You could probably even use somebody like Killmonger, gaining power from the weaknesses and then landing those big ones. There are a lot of ways through this. Just plan it ahead of time and make sure that you're going to get off enough specials and mitigate the weakness enough that you can get through this without burning a ton of revives. Archangel will not work because of shifting immunity. I think some people have been bringing Elsa, because she would hard counter this. Mine is only a 5-star, and she didn't really speak to any of the other nodes. But if you have a 6-star rank 3 Elsa, I would love to see that fight. Nick was another almost Apocalypse solo. I used kinetic transference to my benefit by pushing him to the L2 as often as possible, because then I just didn't have to deal with the L1. The problem here is Lionheart. Apocalypse's poison will trigger this, as will Archangel's. Both of them can solo him, but you have to be aware of that and ready to deal with it. With Archangel, I would heal to full and, boost out the wazoo on your health boosts, and hopefully you can survive it. With Apocalypse, I just never threw a special one for the entire fight. I didn't want to deal with that. So what I did here was I just spammed special 2s. I had power back. They didn't really help me that much, but they were doing a ton of damage. And because they apply concussion, similar to some of the other nodes we've talked about here, if you turn off Vigor even once, then it is gone until the next 25% threshold. And so once I had that first L2 up, Vigor was gone, because it turned... I got a bit lucky. It turned Vigor off the first attempt every single time. But again, you only need it to turn it off once. So that's why Apocalypse is great here, because he will eventually turn off this node. But yeah, spam special 2s. After your first special 2, I recommend building to a special 3 to make everything permanent and to double the concussion. I heavy countered in a few places to land those bleeds. It really wasn't necessary other than to refresh those buffs. The problem is that you lose those debuffs when he goes into his second life and heals to full, and I just was not able to manage getting them back up. Now, Nick does degen, and what I found out, which is beautiful, is that if you have turned off Vigor for each of those phases the way that I did, when his second life triggers and he heals back to full, Vigor did not come back. And so I was able to just wait out his degen. And I got him down to, I think, 15% with Apocalypse. I had an L2 up. I was countering his heavies because he was stun immune to refresh the debuffs. I almost made it, and then he triggered some charges in the wrong place, went unblockable, and I just couldn't hold on to it. It's possible to solo with Apocalypse, but a little bit AI dependent in my opinion. Maybe you'll do better. But at that point, everyone was pretty low, so I think I just threw the rest of my champions at him, had him down to 5%, and then used a team revive because I knew Thanos was coming, and I pretty easily finished him off with Warlock. Whatever works for you there. There are a lot of ways around Nick. Quaking him would also work. I originally planned on that, but I figured Apocalypse would probably be faster if it worked, and I was right. But yeah, you can absolutely quake him. It's not that bad. Then Thanos, just look up this fight if you're not familiar with it. I found the first two phases pretty easy, honestly. He's decently aggressive. Tigra was great for the second phase. Apocalypse was great from the first phase, because just because he's bleed immune by this point. Warlock would have worked fairly well if Apocalypse hadn't gotten through that first phase without any problem. The last phase was a pain in the butt, because even if you land every single intercept, and I only missed one, so every L3 that I ate except one was with that damage reduction down to 25% max, it still hurt, because he has a crud ton of health, and it just takes a while to get through that when you're going to eat an L3 every 10 seconds and it takes off 25% of your health. So I used one more team revive here for him, and I did use a few team potions I had left over from prior content, but I did get him down with only that. And so I used probably a couple dozen L3 potions, almost as many level 4 potions, a few team potions, like I said, 2 team revives, and 17 individual revives. Luckily, every last one of those I had already in my inventory, so I did do this without spending any units, which was very much my goal. It could have gone better. Like I said, I might have brought Mysterio, but losing that synergy may not have been worth it. And so I'm actually pretty happy with it. I think this was about as well as this could have gone with my current roster. I could have spent more time getting better at Quake, and then I probably could have reduced that total further, but I'd honestly rather just spend that time not using Quake and grinding out Arena for units to replace these or something. I mean, I didn't spend units, but you know what I mean. I'd rather spend that time doing almost anything else. One last note on Thanos. Because Avengers only take 10% against him and gain class advantage, this is another reason that I probably would have brought Namor over Quake if I had him, just because he would have been so good for Thanos. But I don't, so I didn't. Maybe you can bring an Avenger and have some awesome fights at the end. I'd love to see that. Hope this helped you. I may try and trim it down a little bit. I know this is quite long. But again, check out Vega's video, check out the spreadsheet. I will put timestamps in this so that we can just look at advice for single fights. And good luck, everyone. Again, do not underestimate this. It's a very serious piece of content. I won't say that it's impossible. Plenty of people are getting through it efficiently, but a lot of those people are very, very skilled and have very good rosters, and are sitting on stacks of units or revives like mine, where, I didn't end up using units, but I had 6,000 banked. I knew that I was in no danger of burning all of them. If you're over there sitting on 500 units and only 10 revives, and your roster isn't as strong as mine for this, think very carefully about whether your skill is enough beyond what I was able to put into this to overcome the difference. Anyway, again, good luck. I hope that anyone who tries it doesn't regret it. The rewards for this are awesome. And if you do have trouble with this, I hope you figure it out soon enough to quit out after 2 paths, get those rewards, and prep for next time. Take care, everybody.